Yes, indeed, the news gang is here. The virus is spreading and the speeches too are going viral. Which speech is which? No movement into, out of, or was it within Nairobi? Should the president's speechwriter stay at home? And the DP is back with a mask and a speech. Also, a special session of MPs that never was. Was it genuine caution or were they just COVID cowards? We'll examine the business that still remains undone in both houses. Also on the show, the kicker, the memo, the punchline, the take, and of course, the angle. Let's begin now, ladies and gentlemen, with that speech that the president made. And he was talking about the destiny of the nation when he made that big speech at State House.
It is in moments like this that the character of a people and the destiny of a nation is truly clarified. Fellow Kenyans, today we are being called upon by our children and our children's children to show the greatness in us by how we respond to this virus. If we act, as I believe we should, like the fingers folded into a fist, we can't stop the damage that this pandemic can cause to our nation.
All right, so Linus, a very trying time, one would say, for the president. I mean, he has never had to speak this many times in such a short period of time, and addressing what is really a weighty matter, a global pandemic, no less.
We've said it here in this show that this is an extraordinary time to be a leader, to be a government. This is not easy. It's not chartered territory. This is completely new experiences, both for leaders and governments. And President Uhuru Kenyatta finds himself in this very unenviable position of leading the country through a very unusual time. But when I listen to that speech talks to the president, not just to the people, but also to the president. It is in times like this that leadership is tested, which I thought was partly a good way of setting the stage for what the president announced that day, which is a partial lockdown, I can call it, of the country. Because when you talk of the movement restrictions introduced to Nairobi, and movement restrictions...
locks Nairobi out of the rest of the country, quite frankly.
Yes, and you remember the experiences of that early evening. People are saying things about residents of Rongai, whether they'll have to leave and how they'll leave Nairobi that evening. And luckily the map came out and it's all well for Rongai residents. They're not really part of the diaspora, as they keep saying. But
and on that you speak for a lot of people. Huh?
A lot of people in this room.
It is important to declare your interest.
This is massive. Let me say this. This is very huge. It's the biggest security operation in peacetime in the history of Kenya.
That's right.
We've never had anything this big. Not even the 2007, 2008 post-election clashes had this kind of an operation. Because what we are talking about right now is literally every policeman in service, in the National Police Service, is tonight on duty.
Yep.
Whether it's a senior officer or a corporal in the lowest ranks, everyone is out on duty. You go to the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, this is a busy night. You go to the National Intelligence Service, this is a very, very busy time. This is the biggest peacetime security operation Kenya has ever launched. And I think it's a big test, not just for the leadership itself, but for the ground troops, because of the kind of unique situations they are facing, and like we shall discuss, including Panya routes.
And interesting, because almost every leader around the world is using the language of war when they're talking about this thing. I mean, if you talk about the UK, if you talk about Emmanuel Macron says, nous sommes en guerre, it's a war, like we are at war with an invisible enemy. And I think the president here also talked about that. Yvonne, the inspirational side of this, because there is a sense in which the president not only has to be firm and give direction to the country, but to a certain degree also a measure of hope, isn't it?
Absolutely. And at this moment, any inkling of hope, any, sign of leadership, of a leader that will carry the country through a tough time is indeed important. And it has been instructive that I think on the few occasions that the president has addressed the nation, he's been giving, a very solid, measure. So it's not just, about, the daily briefings that we are seeing. And one of the justifications, and these are things that we now learned afterwards of the decision that was made to isolate the 4 counties. When I spoke to Karanja Kibicho, he told me that they did the statistics of persons who are above the age of 56 and those who are then considered more vulnerable. And he said that of the over 1 million, that exist in the country, 160,000 are in Nairobi. So that means the bulk of them are outside in the rural areas.
That's almost 20% in Nairobi alone.
Yes. So 80% are upcountry. And that's why they're trying to stop the move from Nairobi, the capital, to the others. And then again, we heard of the 2 cases that were reported in Mandera. That is, and we know now how that happened. They traveled to Kilifi, which is one of the countries with the highest burden.
From abroad, actually.
Yes, from abroad. Yes. And then from Kilifi to Nairobi, to Mombasa, yes, Nairobi, and then
Garissa,
had lunch in Italy, then Garissa, and then Mandera. And so now you start to understand the reasoning behind this. And I guess when we're talking about a president, in some sense, giving hope, I guess we'll come to how he does that and the way in which he communicates it, because then this became a whole other issue towards the end of it. And we'll talk about communication, and particularly from the head of state when he's addressing the nation, and how that can, either be a hit or a miss.
What I find interesting is 2 things. Number one, when you talk about this enemy, we're dealing with an enemy that is faceless, an enemy that is unprecedented. There's no country that we can take an example from that this country X dealt with this enemy this way and triumphed over that enemy, so we are borrowing the tactics. So this is a war that you have to use every available weapon, every available process, every available thought, policy, directive, just to deal with it. And on the partial lockdown, I don't know why there was this excitement that day about a lockdown, but be it as it may, that partial lockdown, I looked at the timing. This is the Easter weekend. And so people are likely to travel up country for one reason or the other. And so locking down Nairobi and those 4 counties was strategic, in my opinion. Strategic in the sense that if 20% of the vulnerable ages in Nairobi, if you take the virus with you to the rural areas, you're going to make a bad situation worse. And especially in the upcountry where the health facilities are literally on their knees. The other weekend we were talking about the number of prime facilities in the upcountry, counties that have ICU facilities, and even the counties that have enough personnel. And we made a conclusion that we are not doing very well. So if you transport the virus from Nairobi to upcountry, and that day 82% of the infections were in Nairobi. The other 16% was in the 3 counties of Kilifi, Kwale, and Mombasa. Therein lies the problem.
And I think also when you speak about the partial lockdown and the expectation people had that day all over social media and everywhere that there was going to be a full lockdown, and then now the president's press conference came, and I must say that it started bang on time at 3 p.m.
Not 3 p.m. State House time.
No, 3 p.m. ya kawaida. And then now the president comes up with all these measures about the no going out or coming into Nairobi. And then that was at 3 p.m. and the order was going to start being implemented at 7 p.m. I think maybe part of the reason is that kuzuia watu from traveling. You say this is Easter weekend. If I had said, let me give people 48 hours, chances are tungekuwa tuna mlolongo ya magari watu wakitoka Nairobi.
Even that day there was one on Thika Road.
The Thika Road was a mess because of people who are trying to leave. And of course, taking this virus to those who are most susceptible to it, who are the elderly or those with pre-existing conditions. But I think for me, what is surprising is that I think the Minister Mutahi Kagwe spoke about it today also, and I think yesterday ACS Dr. Mwangi spoke about it, is a number of infections in Kenya for that very productive age bracket of between 30 to 59. They are the higher number of those who have been infected by this virus as compared to what we've been hearing from the beginning, that it affects the elderly. Yes, there are, but the huge majority is between 30 and 59. And that is, I think, a bit worrying in terms of now it's clear that everyone can get this virus. And that's why I think we need to be very careful about how we go about our daily lives.
Shall we listen?
The statistics are clear,
Francis, before you do that, I want us to listen to the President's directive on the cessation of movement, as he called it, around Nairobi and the other 4 counties.
To contain and limit the spread of the disease to other parts of the country, the National Security Council has sanctioned and caused the issuance of the following additional measures. Number 1, that there shall be cessation of all movement by road, rail, or air in and out of A, the Nairobi metropolitan area, and B, the counties of Kilifi, Kwale, and Mombasa.
A lot of things came up. I mean, in the explanation after this, when he was now giving further details, he said movement within Nairobi, and that caused quite some confusion around this. And that raised a question, Dinas, about the speech itself, the length of it, the structure of it, just how many things were packed into that one speech that the President gave that afternoon. To what extent was that problem of the confusion a factor of that? You know, just the nature of the speech, how it was structured and how long it was?
Well, Macharia Gaitho, our senior, did not mince his words. He said that the speechwriter of the President should be fired for the speech that they wrote. And when I went through the speech, it is indeed too long. First of all, it had an intro or a prelude that is so long. I don't know whether the writer was intending something like a State of the Nation address, which then, of course, misses the point. The point the President made, actually, I have not located the paragraph, but it is in the last few paragraphs where he now declares the cessation of movement in Nairobi and the cessation of movement in the coastal strip. That was the whole point of the press conference. As far as the expectations of Kenyans is concerned, I found the excitement of some of the people, especially on the social media, with a full lockdown quite interesting, because a full lockdown is not something easy. It's a challenge for both the government and the people. A full lockdown actually means there is no movement. A full lockdown is what we've seen in Rwanda, where the government is actually delivering food to people in their homes. Can we do that here? It's going to be a massive challenge for both the government and the people, because first of all of the cost, and 2 of the logistics. And you will look at what approach the government has taken is actually a conservative one, where we are only using the internal security institutions as the police, and I think I've seen a bit of NYS and the prisons. In Rwanda, you'll see the military is being involved. In Uganda, you'll see the military is being involved. Our military is in the barracks. We have not gone in that direction. So the long and short of it, the speech, too long, up and winding, to make the point of the day, which
and actually on that night, quite frankly, the biggest point that the President needed to make was these travel restrictions in and out of Nairobi and the 3 counties at the coast. I mean, that was big enough to form the basis of any speech. He didn't need to add anything else, because he ended up talking about literally everything, including the economic measures that he had taken about a week earlier. Jamila, what struck you from that speech?
I think I was was among those who kept waiting for that lockdown because of the conversation that had been going on the whole day, not even just that day, but for days before that. We were waiting to hear what he had to say. And we kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And he wouldn't get to that point until almost towards the end, as Linus has said. And I was not the only one. I was following conversation online and everyone was saying, Kwani afiki hapo. And then now he brings in all these other issues, including the 2 billion shillings that had been given as money that had been recovered, assets recovery by the DPP and the other arms. And then comes the issue about the musicians and the 100 million that's going to be given to them. Now that also
caused a whole furore.
And people saying, how can they give 100 million to musicians? Oh, what have they done? Of course, it's something that he had talked about before even this corona pandemic started, but just that it was put there at the wrong time.
And people actually took it out of context. There was some free money that was being dished out.
Yeah, so it was wrong timing. And on top of that, now the confusion that came out of what he had said, because we started seeing panic buying. People were in the shops trying to buy stuff because they hadn't understood what exactly he means. Those were saying, oh, maybe he said we can't move within Nairobi, we can't leave and we can't come in. So there was a lot of confusion, and he took several tweets, even from Nzioka Waita and a few other people, just to try and explain to us that this is what the president meant. So I think if that speech had just focused on that bit and a few of the measures, of course, he said keep washing hands, maintain social distancing, wear your masks and all that, I think maybe would have been saved those few hours of confusion that we saw.
Joe, just some good news in the Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson, has left intensive care to a general ward, and they're saying he continues to improve. That's very good news.
Must be a collective sigh of relief in the UK. In London. Yvonne, crisis communication, it's not a good thing when later on someone has to say, oh, this is actually what the president meant.
And we've talked about this, I think, from the beginning. Remember, even when the students were stuck in Wuhan, even before, the first case was reported in the country. Now, the thing about crisis communication is it has to be simple. Short, simple, stupid. Like the simplest of minds can be able to understand what he said. So one of the things that's important, in my view, is language. Big words is what we tend to use. When he said he's ordering cessation of movement, this was cessation as in cease, which means stop, or was it cessation as in from the verb secede, which is kujitenga, like Pwani si Kenya type of thing?
He nearly excited MRC.
He did. And
then I saw the people of Rongai. You don't think about this metropolitan area is now going to be another country.
Deciding to secede after all the fun that people have poked at them. And then I saw other people making fun, obviously. They were saying, imambo ya C-section, sasa imeingia namna gani. But in essence, you need to keep it simple. What he meant was, we're
stopping moving in and out of Nairobi.
Yes. So that was one, I think, for me, that we need to start to do a little bit less of. And then I also thought he should have been, keep it concise. He should have been presidential, and presidential in this moment would have been for him to announce this cessation, restriction of movement, stoppage of movement, and leave it at that. About the 2 billion shillings, that could easily have been announced by CS Sukuri Atani the next day, when in fact he did receive the check from EACC, DPP, and who else was there? And DCI was there.
CEO of EACC.
Exactly. So that could have been announced by CS Yatani. The one on the artists, which, by the way, is a measure that the president had started last year, should have been announced by CS Musheru. And leave the very most important of news, including the number of cases that were reported on Monday. Should have been a press release, yes.
CS Mwangangi.
Right, from the Ministry of Health. And to leave the president to deliver the most important news in a clear and simple manner. And on this, I would just like to add that, a lot of people make fun of, the man across the border that we call Bazukulu, or Grandpa. Which is President Yoweri Museveni. And, he has granted long, winding speeches, but he's very simple. He will use Runyankole, he will use Kiswahili, he will use Luganda, but he tries to explain to the residents and his citizens the drunkards spitting on each other. And we make fun of it, but there's something about the way he tries to communicate things simply, removing kizungu mingi from, all of these things that we use. And I think that's what's important in crisis.
I just want to expound on Yvonne's point. And the point you're also making is that of, can the president be felt?
Yes.
because there's there's an element of detachment,
Right.
because you're reading from a written speech. This president is yet to go off cuff to show us his feelings about
Right.
this situation. Bazukulu has done it,
Yeah.
including doing press-ups.
He spent 15 minutes
Yeah.
explaining what he meant by staying at home.
Absolutely.
So please don't think you are just inside your house. You can walk in the compound.
Absolutely. So the
During
president
the day,
is
you can
coming.
go to the farm.
There you go.
Yeah, the president is coming across as a bit detached.
Yeah.
He's communicating to us so officially. It's almost, you know, he doesn't feel us. He doesn't feel the situation. He needs to go off the script, put that speech down and tell us what your appreciation of the situation is. You can explain that secession in your
and
own
tell
words.
us that you understand the
yes.
fears that we have, the anxiety, the worries about, you know, our economy, about our health, about what's going to happen. We just need to feel that from him. I watched the speech.
Francis, make it brief so that we go for a break.
Actually, I wanted to. Oh, be
This is
presidential.
your moment.
Okay.
You want to take us to the break?
Yes, I'll take you to a break. In fact, I was looking at the speech. It was a buffet.
Yeah.
It had everything that you would have needed. But at that point, what we needed was precision. This is it. And then my concern on that day was every time the president says something and it has to be clarified thereafter, therein is a problem. It must be so clear, so concise that no one needs any clarification thereafter, such that people start implementing what has been communicated, what has been directed instantly without further clarification being sought. And on that particular day, I thought it ought to have been very concise. And then it is important to remember that people are very keen on what is being said. From the press briefings by Mutahi Kagwe to the presidential press briefings, people are very keen. Why? Because they are concerned. They are worried. They don't know what is being communicated next. So when you want to do that, please be time conscious, as Yvonne says, be punctual, but be concise so that you don't leave interpretations all over. Because on that day, you could see WhatsApp groups had all manner of interpretations on what the president meant, within, inside,
in and out,
all those things. And yes, that's it.
Christine Mbenya says, Francis Gashuri, you are very quiet today. I'm sure now she noticed you can speak.
I am here.
Let's go for a break. We'll be back.